All right, guys, welcome back to the Nourished to Thrive podcast. I am super excited about this podcast episode today because I have here my past client, Courtney, and she's going to be chatting about some things about her own story, her own struggles with food, but also to create more awareness around some of the common struggles I know so many women face when it comes to food, body image, and exercise, but also, navigating having kids in the future and dealing with so many mixed messages from diet and fitness culture. So with all that to say, Courtney, why don't you give yourself a little introduction about, who you are and tell us a little bit more about, your history with food and we can go from there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today. So my name is Courtney Tucker. I am 34. I'm a mom of two. I have two little girls. One is 10 months and another is 3 years old. And I have really been in this fitness, health, diet culture space for a really long time. I would say that I started dieting and really creating food rules back in my sophomore year of college. Is the first time I remember kind of going down this path, which was about 15 years ago. And so since then, up until when I started working with Emily, it had just become a way of life to live by these food rules that I had created over these years. And, they're so prevalent in our society today that I think I had convinced myself that it was just very normal, eating at certain times or limiting meals to certain types of food or certain amount of calories. And in 2015, I got certified to be a personal trainer, and I got my certification as in nutrition, which doesn't really mean a whole lot, but that's where I really started to get into this world of flexible dieting, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And if you're not, it's just like the tracking of macros. And that's where I think things really started to become an obsession for me. I see flexible dieting now as like the biggest lie in the fitness industry, because for me, it became anything but flexible. It was the complete opposite of that for me. So as someone who has a very type A personality, it became a very obsessive way for me to control my food intake. And while it seemed innocent at first, over time, it completely took me out of my body to where I had no sense of my own hunger and fullness cues. Emily probably remembers the first several weeks we worked together. It was like I have a really hard time telling when I'm hungry, when I'm full, because I relied so much on the numbers from tracking everything for so long. So it just had so many negative impacts on my life that we can definitely dive into. So that's kind of my background in kind of this space and kind of what led me to reach out to Emily.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh my gosh. And I'm really glad that you brought up the whole what they call flexible dieting because honestly, I feel like in today's wellness, I'm going to put like in quotes, wellness culture, like a lot of what we see, it looks very innocent, right? It looks like, oh, I'm just, I'm living this healthy lifestyle. I'm taking care of myself. I'm eating these like high protein foods. Like, however, you and I both know that like underneath that for so many people is this rooted obsession with trying to be perfect with, their nutrition, with dieting, with food, with their bodies, with exercise. And for that, somebody who has this like perfectionistic mindset, tracking in particular can be very disordered. Was that the case
Sure.
for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, it for sure was the case for me. I think at first, and I think anything done in moderation can be okay. But from my experience, and what I didn't mention is, after I was a personal trainer, I was actually an online coach. So I coached other women on how to use flexible dieting. And now looking back, I have some guilt around that because I now see the damage that it does over time. But like anything, I think in moderation, I think if it were realistic for you to track for a period of time, just to have some education around it, I guess it taught me like now I know what types of macros are in foods. And so I do think there is some positive education that can come from it. But from my experience working with hundreds of women at this point, it does become obsessive, and it does become very, very hard for women to transition out of that. And that was the case for me, is that it was so, it gave me so much anxiety to think about eating a meal without knowing the numbers behind it. And so I think what could have good intentions initially, like I had great intentions when I started flexible dieting, but I wasn't aware of the bigger picture and the longer term negative effects that could have.
Mhm, mhm. And let's kind of like talk about some of those negative effects because obviously there are like the mental, but there's also probably some physical effects too. If obviously we're using, this guise of control to track to kind of like undereat and like chronically diet, obviously there's going to be a host of issues with that. But as far as like the things that you were noticing specifically, what exactly was your biggest why and like your motivation to reach out to like to me specifically that you're like, I can't do this on my own?
Yeah. Well, there's so much. I mean, we could talk about this for hours and hours because there's so many things. I had for a while, really since having my first daughter, so like over 3 years ago, I've wanted to make a change, and even before that, I had seen and I had it in the back of my head that like this way of behaving, this form of restriction, this form of control wasn't healthy, right? It was very hard for me when I was in like the thick of it to go out to eat, to go to any family gatherings, to do anything really. And food is such a huge part of our culture. To do anything and fully be present, I couldn't enjoy it because I was in my head just thinking about the food and then stressing about overeating or not hitting my goals and then having to do exercise to make up for it. And so it not only took me out of my body and being able to listen to my own hunger and fullness, um, but it took me out of the moment of experiencing all of these beautiful things that we get to experience. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. So for me, it was like, okay, I knew this wasn't the best quality of life, but I wasn't at a point where I was going to do anything about it probably until I had my daughter, my first daughter. And then, when they're a baby, they don't really know anything, right? But as she got older, I was like, oh my gosh. And anyone who has kids or you spend any time around kids, they're like sponges, right? Especially in those early years. And I was like, anything I do, she's going to model. Right. And there's no faking it. Right. I can't be weighing food and tracking food and, analyzing things on a menu at a restaurant and having these meal timings without her picking up on it eventually, right? Maybe not when she's 2 or 3, but eventually she's going to pick up on that, right? And so I realized, like, in order to avoid passing my unhealthy relationship with food and my unhealthy food habits onto her and to my other daughter, I had to do something about it. And so for a while, I was like, I can do this on my own, right? Like, I know what to do. I can do it on my own. But the truth is, I had to get to a point where I finally accepted, like, I wasn't going to make the change on my own, right? I needed guidance. And most importantly, I needed accountability. I needed somebody who would, like, not just show me the way, but who would hold me accountable to doing the things I needed to do to really let go of the control and let go of the food rule. So, all that to say, like, ultimately my daughters and then my quality of life that I want to live with my family was my greatest reason for starting this, and what will stay at the forefront of my motivation to continue this journey and not revert back to my old ways.
Mhm. That's huge. That's huge to think about. And especially like women who may be in their like, teens or in like their young 20s where maybe they don't have kids. It's like, oh, it's no big deal. Like it's no big deal. It's only affecting me. But the truth is, I do feel like I mean, obviously young kids are very impressionable. I think that's such a huge reason to kind of make that step. But for somebody who might be like single and, in their 20s and just doing things like for themselves at this point, I know it can be like very easy to feel like it's just kind of selfish. It's like, oh, I can do this like just for me. But
Yeah.
in my experience, I think that like even if you feel like it's only affecting you, I do feel like our relationships with food in our bodies affect everybody. Everybody that we're around, because it's like it's gonna affect your relationships with like significant others, with your friends, with your family members, because they all see those patterns too. Because it's like, it's hard to make plans with people if you have to have like a set meal time. It's hard to be
Yeah.
present in like family gatherings if like you have to eat your special foods by yourself, or if you have to, wake up super early before everybody else to get your workout in when everybody else is like just enjoying their Christmas morning. So I
Mhm.
do feel like it really has an impact elsewhere too. But I'm really glad that you decided that, like, you're gonna wait till you have your daughters to like actually make that change for yourself. Um, because sometimes, I mean, I don't know if you relate to this, but sometimes you have to do it for somebody else before you can do it for yourself to actually see the benefits.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It was something I knew I wanted. And even before I had kids, like I can think back on one of my best friends in college and how it like kind of broke up our relationship because I wouldn't go out or do anything. I can think about before I was married, when I was just dating my husband, I vividly remember this like huge, very emotional conversation that we had where we almost broke up because it became so impactful in our relationship that I couldn't go out to eat, and I was just, all the obsessive things that, and it's kind of sad looking back to say like those weren't enough for me to like seek help. But everyone's on their own journey and has to get to the point on their own. But it impacts all your relationships. And if you're, having trouble seeing that from like this perspective, I always think about how other people who are consumed in diet culture affect me, right? Because you and I have talked a lot about that through our work together, is being at family gatherings and having a family member talking about the diet they're on, or that they're not eating carbs, or they're not eating sugar, or they're demonizing whatever food they're demonizing, or talking about how they have to make up for, all the calories they're eating, and all of that talk that goes on that's so, in quotes, normal now. It's like I feel how that affects me. So I have to believe that my behaviors are going to affect other people for better or worse, right? And so you're
Mhm,
absolutely right. It's affecting everybody around us.
mhm. Oh my gosh. That reminds me, way back when I was struggling with this myself, like I remember there was a Thanksgiving that, and this has nothing to do with like, being vegan or whatever, but like I was vegan that year. And this was, like, literally back in college, and I remember having to make, like, my special foods on Thanksgiving and not being able to just enjoy any of the Thanksgiving food that my mom prepared because it didn't fit my special needs, and it wasn't like I said, I was vegan for the wrong reasons back then, so yeah, I mean, you can take this with any kind of diet, right? Like, and I know veganism, like, I'm not like I said, I've worked with clients who have been vegan, but, like, any kind of diet, whether that be like, oh, I'm avoiding carbs, or I'm keto, or I can't eat this or this and this. And maybe you don't have a legitimate reason to avoid those foods, but like in the back of your head, it's like, I'm avoiding these foods because it's coming from a place of fear. And that's ultimately
Mm-hmm.
like what it was for me. It was like, I'm avoiding all these things that have animal products in it because I didn't want my body to change. And
Yeah.
so when you're taking like something like that, whether that, any kind of diet that you have, and it's getting in the way of you being able to just live your life and to be present and to make those memories with people, it is going to have a huge impact. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you talked a lot about needing support and accountability. So I love this kind of point of view because so many of us say, I'm going to start tomorrow. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to change. But then we ultimately kind of go back to like the safety of like what we know. Do you feel like that was ultimately the one of the biggest things kind of keeping you stuck?
Sure. Absolutely. Yes. I mean, over the last several years, I think of it as like a roller coaster, right? Like I'd have good seasons where I would let go of some of the control. I would be, especially when I was like pregnant and like, you're kind of like, I got a little bit, more loose with my diet. I wasn't so strict. And so I had these seasons where things were really good and I was doing well. But inevitably, what would happen for me, and what I think happens for a lot of people, is I would have a bad body image day, week, month, quarter, and always my safety net was reverting back to tracking. And so I would almost trick myself into thinking like, I'm healthy, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm doing well, I'm not tracking, or I'm not, weighing out everything I eat. And so I would make some progress, but then as soon as I would feel like I got too out of control, I would always go back to the tracking. It was like my husband used to, I remember when we were having conversations about this years ago, he thinks of it as an addiction. And,
Mhm.
I don't know if people are offended by that, but I think it is an addiction. I was very addicted to, to obsessing about my food and tracking. And so like any addiction, right, is that, you relapse, you can go back. And that's what I was doing. And even now, I've set calls up with Emily for the future, just to have that ongoing accountability, which is such an awesome option that you have. But I do think that it's very easy when things get hard, or when you get influenced by outside voices and you hear what other people are doing. It's so easy to want to go back to that, or think you should do that, right? And so absolutely, I've experienced that of kind of making progress, then going back, making progress, then going back. And so ultimately, I've seen this pattern happen enough that I was like, I have to do something that's going to get me over this hump, to where I have other tools and other things I can turn to that isn't going back to controlling food.
Mhm. Mhm. I love that you brought up control, because a lot of people don't think of it as that, but it really does come back to like that needing control of
Mm-hmm.
something. And I think that's why people end up tracking, because it makes them feel like they have control over food. But I always kind of come in to say, like, sometimes it's not actually you controlling food, but food controlling you.
It's
It's like,
exactly what it is.
think
It's
about how
exactly what it is.
much, yeah, think about how much food controls you when you're tracking, how much it
Yeah.
controls your day. I remember one big thing that you and I worked on was like the meal times of like, I think this is something that so many people get so hooked onto with the tracking of like, oh, this is when I have meal one, this is when I have meal two, this is when I have meal three. And it's like you become so robotic with that. It's like it takes you so out of touch with like, am I actually hungry, or am I just eating because it's like quote unquote meal time?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's what you said is could not be more true. It's this false perception of control. We think we're in control of food, but ultimately what we're doing is food is controlling us. Food is controlling our lives. And that is exactly where I lived for so long. And, like you, I've been vegan, I've been paleo, I've turned to these diets because I was looking for some type of rule, some type of parameters to follow, right? Because it felt really safe. And ultimately, all that it was, and what I learned through working with you, is it was me not trusting my body. It was me not trusting my body to tell me what it needed, right? And it's interesting because we don't really learn that. And I watch my 3-year-old eat, and kids are so good at this, right? I don't know where they lose it, but kids, like, if I put food in front of her and she's not hungry, she's not gonna touch it. And in some way, I like so admire that, because I'm like, we lose that as we get older, right? Because we do fall to these societal rules that tell us when to eat and whatnot. And so I think we can look at kids before they're negatively influenced, right? And so all that to say, I had to learn to trust my body again. I had to go back, and I'll be honest, like, I'm still learning. I'm definitely not like perfect at this. I'm still having to use the tools that you gave me regularly to really check in with myself, and still, like anything, I learn more about my own body all the time. But it comes down to just being able to trust your body, so you don't have to rely on a certain diet or certain rules or whatever it may be.
Mhm. And that's why I always call intuitive eating like a journey, because you're
Mm-hmm.
always learning. Like, I feel like I'm still
Yeah.
learning about my body. And, when we think about just working with like a dietitian to help you with like, getting out of dieting and kind of more into back with your body and getting out of this like restricted binge cycle, it's like, it's really about planting a seed. And when you plant that seed, you now have everything that you need in order to grow into like blossom, right? It's not about like a quick fix. It's not about like, in 16 weeks, you're just going to be healed. Like, you're not going to have all these thoughts. It's about having thoughts, but being able to better navigate it. It's being able
Mm-hmm.
to not act on it. It's being able to understand yourself better and come back home to you versus resorting right back to the things that made you feel safe in the past. So
Yeah,
I would like to consider it
absolutely.
just like the start of your healing journey, so that you can take things into your own hands and continue to grow as a person.
Absolutely. Yeah, because ultimately, like, that's the only thing that's going to be sustainable, is knowing how to listen to your body. Because what your body needs in one season or one week or one month or whatever it changes, right? It evolves, right? We could talk about women and like our cycles and that's evolving, or like just your age, things evolve, or I know when I was pregnant and breastfeeding and like things would evolve with my what I needed for fuel and how I needed to fuel my body. And so if we're just sticking to one diet or sticking to certain macros or whatever, we're totally not taking that into account, the evolution of what our needs are.
Hmm. So I have a question for you. I know this did come up during our coaching together, but I just want to hear you talk about it. Um, Very often I see people when they're doing intuitive, or they're trying to do intuitive eating by themselves, they will end up creating new food rules as an intuitive eater. So they'll kind of almost manipulate intuitive eating into a new diet. Did this ever come up for you, whether, through our coaching or even like on your own when you were trying to like, get out of food rules and out of tracking, but kind of being more in tune with your body?
Yes, I remember one instance specifically of it coming up. I'm sure it's come up more. And you called me out on it because I wasn't even aware that I was doing it. And I think because having rules became so normal to me, I was exactly that. I was trying to create more rules. But I remember, so you give us like this food scale, right? You talk about the like hunger and fullness
Mhm.
scale. And so at every meal, I started becoming a little bit obsessive with, wanting to make sure I was hitting that perfect amount of fullness. And I remember you saying to me, like, don't make this another food rule. And you gave me even permission to be like, sometimes you might eat a little past your fullness, and sometimes you might, leave yourself, a little hungrier. You're like, but it's a range, right? You're not trying to like hit this certain number. And so that was like freeing for me, that like, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I don't know how many times you told me that over the last few months of like, it doesn't have to be perfect. There's no perfect here. It's just finding a way that this can work for you and that you can live your life in a way that you're not constantly thinking about food, right? So I see how it can be very easy for people to do, to want to turn it into more rules. And I think just you constantly reminding me of like, that's not the point here. We're not creating more rules is what I needed to like even have the awareness around it.
Hmm. Yeah, I hear you. And I think one thing too, when I get new clients, there's sometimes we're not even aware of the things that are disordered. Sometimes there's people that like they come to me with coaching and it's like, I wasn't even aware that was a food rule. I wasn't even aware that this was something that was having a huge impact on my life. Or like I wasn't
Sure.
aware that this is why I was binging, because I didn't realize that these rules that I had in my mentality, my mindset was causing this to happen. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think for anybody listening who's thought about coaching, it's like sometimes it can be helpful to have somebody oversee like what is going on a day-to-day basis, just to kind of give you an outer perspective of like, hey, like this is just me kind of coming in with a gentle reminder, a gentle like approach to like say, hey, maybe this is something that you haven't looked at before that I can help you with, to help you navigate, to create like a new normal for you. Because again, dieting and disordered eating, the longer that you do it, the longer it feels like this is my new normal. Like this is my new
Yeah,
normal. This is my way of living. And it kind of keeps you from expanding on it and growing from it. So Courtney, I want to
for
ask you,
sure.
how do you feel like your relationship with food now, the relationship that you have with exercise in your body, how is it different now that you've gone through this process?
It's very different. I think the biggest thing is the awareness. It's like things I was doing that I didn't even know were not normal or that were negatively affecting me. um, I have such a greater awareness around it. I'm not perfect. There's still times where I eat past fullness, or whatever it may be. But now, if I catch myself thinking, for example, like, oh, it's only 10:30 and I'm kind of hungry, and in my head I'm like, oh, it's not time for lunch yet. I have this awareness where I'm like, oh, nope, food rule. And I love the phrase you use. I think about it all the time where you talk about being a diet culture rebel. And so I think that to myself. I'm like, nope, you're a diet culture rebel. If you're hungry, you're going to eat. Right. And so it still comes up because it's been ingrained in me for over a decade. Right. I've been developing these probably longer than that, these rules. And so I recognize it's going to take time to break it, but I have so much awareness around it. When I go out to eat, the first thing I would always do when I look at the menu is like, I think to myself, okay, how many calories are in these things, right? And now I choose what I want to eat off the menu based on what I want to eat. I've gotten so much better. One of the things I really struggled with when I started working with you was the whole clean your plate mentality.
Mhm.
And I vividly remember flexible dieting influencers when I, used to consume a lot of that content saying like, God, clean your plate, no macro left behind was the saying I would hear people say. And so I had this like, okay, no macro left behind. I got to eat everything. And so I would always clean my plate. That was one of the things I really struggled with when we first started working together. And I don't do that anymore. I eat until I want to eat, and then I'll pack it up or, whatever it may be. But it's given me this freedom where like I can order a big dish of pasta without feeling like I have to finish every last bit of it. And so my relationship with food is just very different. I eat when I feel hungry, whether it's 6 in the morning or it's 9 p.m. or whatever it may be. And if I have a day or I have a meal where I'm like, oh, I ate past fullness, or oh, that didn't sit right, or that left me mentally, still hungry, it didn't really satisfy my craving, I make note of it, and then I try to do better the next day. I don't dwell on it. We just had, we're recording this after Thanksgiving was just a couple weeks ago, and it was like such a huge win for me to be able to go through a holiday and eat plenty of food, indulge plenty, and have zero regret, zero guilt, zero feeling like I had to go do extra exercise the next day. And not just that, but I was so present with my family that I was like, oh my gosh, I have come so far. I've come so far in just a short amount of time. So, that's a long answer to just say like, so much has changed. So much has changed for me mentally, physically, relationally. I mean, I'm in a totally different place still on this journey though.
Oh, I love to hear that. And
Yeah.
this is just like a rapid fire question. If you had to think about a food that you never thought that you would be able to make peace with, that it's easy for you now. What food would that be?
Oh gosh, desserts in general. Probably ice cream, but just desserts in general.
Hmm. Yeah.
I would anytime I would have a dessert, there would be a guilt associated with it. I would have to eat the whole thing. Um, and I don't. And what's interesting is like I don't think about it anymore. Like I don't obsess over it. It used to always be on my mind, and
Mhm.
now it's like, yeah, we can have ice cream in the house, or we can get a piece of cake when we're out to eat, and like I'll eat some of it. I'll eat the whole thing if I want the whole thing, but there's not this obsession and this focus on it. And I think for a while, I've totally forgotten about this, but that just reminded me in the beginning of us working together. I was eating like ice cream every single night. I think I told you like I have to have ice cream at the end of every single night. It was like I had this permission, I could eat whatever I want. So I like almost swung the pendulum too far the other way, where it's like I wanted to eat it all the time.
Mhm.
But then that subsided. Like it just, it's like I gave myself the permission. I enjoyed it. And now it's like I can enjoy it in a healthy amount now. I'm sure you see that with other people when you've like restricted yourself, then you want to eat a ton of it. And then you like kind of balance out and you're like, yeah, I still enjoy ice cream, but I don't need to eat a whole pint to get the satisfaction. So
Oh,
yeah,
100%.
that's probably the one that comes up for me most.
Yeah, no, that's one of the biggest things that I see. And one of the, I guess, first things that I typically tend to address is like that all or nothing, or again, even having like the clean the plate mentality when it comes to sweets. Like I used to have that, like definitely when it came to ice cream, it was like, oh, it's the pint or it's no pint at all for weeks, for like
Sure.
months.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
I definitely I'm glad that you feel more in control with sweets now, because there's nothing more freeing than be able to have like a pint or two of ice cream in the freezer and like not think about it. Like
Mm-hmm.
not have it be this like persistent thought of like, when am I gonna have it? How much am I gonna have? Like, how can I plan it into my day? It's like it's just
Sure.
there. We can have
Yeah.
it when we want it, and it doesn't have to be this big thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
And for me, it was just like, don't keep it in the house.
yeah.
Right. And
Mhm.
then when we'd have a holiday or something and we'd take home, leftover cookies or whatever it may be, then it was like I would have to eat them all. And it would be this mindset of like, get rid of them. Because the faster you get rid of them, then I don't have to think about it anymore. Right.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's so disordered when you like say it out loud, but it's like, it was so normal for me for so long and so normal for a lot of people. But
Mhm.
yeah. much better on this side.
Yes, yes, I love it. And my last question for you is what would you say to somebody right now who is struggling with a relationship with food, but kind of has a little bit about like denial around it?
Mm. I would just start paying attention, just really pay attention to how like how much food is on your mind. Like that was the first big red flag for me, is like I'm thinking about food all the time. When I would eat breakfast, I'd be thinking about what I was going to have for lunch and whatever. And then even the day before, I would think about what I was going to eat the next day. And it was just always on my mind. So I would think about that. Um, and I would think about when you are around other people, when you are either in social gatherings or you're having dinner with your significant other or whatever it may be around your kids, see if you can notice behaviors that may be negatively impacting them or that maybe just aren't ideal for the quality of life that you want to live. And it requires you to get so brutally honest with yourself, because I faked myself for so many years. I was like, it's not that bad. It's not a big deal, whatever. But the truth is, like, it compounds over time, right? And so what might just be like a small thing you're doing now that doesn't seem super significant, next week, next month, next year, for me at least, it just piled on and on and on and on and on until it so drastically impacted my life that now I look back and I'm like, wow, I lost years of being able to be fully present, to fully enjoy life, because I was so mentally consumed by the thought of food. And so I think if you can start to notice not even red flags, but maybe just little pink flags, the sooner you can take control, like truly take control and reclaim your true, I hate using the word freedom because, you know, people in the flexible dieting community all say, you know, food freedom, but truly have freedom around being able to eat and not obsessing over food. Because at the end of the day, food is meant to fuel our bodies, right? Like, and it's nothing more. It's meant to give us fuel. Yes, it can be super enjoyable. I still thoroughly enjoy food, but it's not meant to control you. It's not meant to be an obsession. And so it's that fine line. And I think everybody has to find for themselves what is the quality of life that you want when it comes to food, because food's going to be a part of your day every single day for the rest of your life,
Mhm,
right? And so having a poor relationship with food truly does impact everything.
mhm. Oh my gosh, you have come so far. You have come so far. I'm so proud of you. And I'm really glad that you shared a bit about your story because I just know this is something that is kind of like a worldwide phenomenon of like so many women are in denial about it. And, I think that you just sharing this is going to shed so much light on this topic. And again, I so appreciate you being so open to sharing your story. So thank you so much, Courtney.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope it resonated with someone.
Of course.